Welcome to the Rise to Thrive podcast with your hosts, Linda Tate and Amelia Travis, your life resource for manifestation, wellness, and abundance. Tune in weekly to thrive daily. This week's episode coming at you. Good day, podcast listeners. We are so happy to be here with you with our episode on conscious communication with the Rise to Thrive podcast. Communication being a part of every one of our days and in all of our relationships. So we're excited to explore the different aspects of this and helping you to be able to feel empowered in the different relationships and being more present and conscious in those exchanges. Over to you, Amelia.
Yo, what's up, guys? Yeah, so today we're talking about conscious communication, which can feel like one of those kind of maybe new age woo-woo-y things that we say, but really conscious communication is based on the idea that our emotional well-being flows directly from our ability to clearly communicate our desires and needs and boundaries to other human beings. So the guiding principle behind conscious communication is that we're making it as easy as possible for other people to meet us where we are, to meet our needs, our desires, and honor our boundaries, because we are sharing those with them so that we can build strong, mutually enriching relationships. So I think go ahead, Linda.
Well, in relationships being how we relate to each other. And so that being a really important part of, it's not like what's in it for me, it's how we're relating to each other.
Absolutely. And for this episode, talking about conscious communication and how it enriches relationships, we're going to take the broad definition of relationships. So it's not just you and your boo thing, but it's you and it can be your partner or your lover. It could also be your parents or your children. It could be coworkers. It could be even just acquaintances. So any other, mostly humans probably, that you're communicating with. But basically, if you want to apply this information to improve your communications with your dog or your cat or your pet rock,
it works too.
It would also be great for those. So before we dive into, our tips, techniques, and practices that we adhere to or implement in order to improve conscious communication, I think it would be helpful for us to look at for a minute the root of the problem or the question of whether there is a problem. So Linda, I'd love to know, do you feel that effective communication is something that people are born with, or it's something that we need to learn?
I think that we need to learn and refine our communication as much as we could grow in any area of our life. I think that there may be inherent skills that we have, and I think so much comes into the environments we're born into. And so if you come into a family that's great at communication, you could be maybe off the bat a great communicator. And there's obviously variations of any of this, but I think definitely there's room to grow and learn and continue to grow and learn.
Absolutely. And I think it's really important to remember that all of language is learned. So all communication is something that we adopt, exactly as you said, Linda, based on the people who teach it to us, which is first and foremost, usually our parents or whoever our primary caregiver is shortly after birth. And then, teachers, institutions, schools, churches, wherever we are in those learning environments, we're continuing to learn from every interaction that we have with other people. I think that the recognition of what I'm going to call the problem, for lack of a better word, or the challenge in interpersonal communication is that every single person is coming to the communicative state, right? The conversation with different thoughts, feelings, emotions, perspective, and worldview. We are different from other people. And no, we are all the same robots. We all
Earthling.
So because we are so wonderfully and perfectly and beautifully made in all of our diversity and differences, communication breakdown happens. It's It's just a natural thing.
Unless every single person were to say, we are all different and we all communicate differently. I'm going to come into this conversation with immense grace and perspective to my counterpart from their perspective.
Yeah, and
every single time.
I think if you just watch Fox News or CNN, you can see that that's definitely the case.
Every time.
In our world today. Always. All right. So, jokes aside, if you take a moment, dear listener, and examine in your life right now, are there any relationships, lovers, partners, friends, family relationships, work relationships, where you feel like you're experiencing blockage, obstacle, or challenge in your communication? Some symptoms of those blockages as you're considering this might be anger, frustration, defensiveness, sadness,
lack
the
of
desire
excitement.
to shut down. Yeah. So, and I'm sure there are many others. Those are the ones that come to mind first for me, probably because those are the areas where I experience the most challenge in communication. So I'd love to invite you right now to just think about that. And probably somebody pops into mind, probably some interaction that you had this past week comes to mind where the communication didn't flow as nicely as you would hope. Linda, can you think of any communications in the past week where maybe it could have been a little bit smoother?
Yes.
And we'll leave it at that. The suspense is killing me, but we don't need to know the sordid details. I shared on last week's episode a communication challenge between myself and my husband that was just rooted in his desire to have my company and to have my presence, and my desire to be grinding on Instagram on my telephone. And where those two different desires didn't quite meet up, there was an opportunity for conflict or for a communication challenge, in that he was asking for my time, energy, and attention. I was feeling like I needed to, I'm putting this in air quotes, do work on Instagram. And so we got into a little tiff, and I had to apply some of these principles of conscious communication in order to bring us back to center and to a place where we could each feel seen, heard, and loved. Notice that I didn't include understood in that, because I think that's ultimately the goal, is for both people to understand each other. But I think that there's also this very real thing that happens where we may not understand each other, and we can choose consciously to love each other anyway. So sit with that for a minute. We can not understand each other, and we can choose to love each other anyway. And Linda, you said the word a few minutes ago, and that word is grace. We can give grace in our communications, even when we don't understand. Do you agree?
I agree. And I think when you asked about, a communication that bubbled up in a way that wasn't maybe the most resourceful, one does come to mind where I was frustrated about my partner's work schedule, and long story short, there was a meltdown, but what came on the other side of that was a whole new way of exploring that conversation each time. That is like us to have a conversation about scheduling. And that felt like a huge win, where in the past it could go into the cycle of, the same thing that came up, the same emotions are triggered, the same storyline goes. And this time was the breakthrough of like, what really is the solution? And so I would also urge the consideration of sort of forward momentum and noticing when you're stuck in like a habitual communication pattern.
Yeah, look for patterns.
Yeah, and like so much is, and when you can start observing the pattern and say, it's just simply I choose something different, and what does that look like? And you can decide that within the communication. And that to me is conscious communication. When conscious communication happens, it's when you're able to be an observer versus be a reactor, and be able to pivot within the communication. And when you can be aware of those patterns and cycles, it's easier to then observe and make a change.
Yes. So one of the things that has been really beautiful in my marriage is that a few years ago, I taught my husband that sometimes when I'm melting down, as you just said, he will offer potential solution after potential solution, and I will continue to reject them. And that led to a lot of frustration. He would say, you're bitching or complaining about this thing. He never said you're bitching because he doesn't say that, but he'd be like, hey, you're complaining about this thing. I'm offering you solutions. You're rejecting the solutions. I don't understand what you want. And I would say, yeah, exactly. You don't understand. You can't understand because you're not a woman, because you don't do yoga, because you don't know my pain, whatever it is. And I told him, I need you to say, I don't understand, but I love you. And I was like, and from here on out, if I hear you say, I don't understand, but I love you, then I know that you are doing your best in that moment to make me feel seen, heard, and loved, because that's what I've asked you to say. And so it's become this coded message, if you will, where when he says, I don't understand, but I love you, what he's saying is, I'm willing to sit with you in this shit. I'm willing to let you emote and express and go ahead through your crazy woman whirlwind, do whatever you need to do. I'll be your oak tree. I'm just going to be right here. And I may never understand the experience that you're having, but I'm here with you as you're having that experience. And for me, yeah, go ahead.
You go ahead.
For me, that was just such a beautiful declaration of love. And it was rooted in me being able to proactively communicate my needs and desires to him. So explaining to him, hey, when I'm freaking out and I'm going, into my emotional whirlwind, and you're trying to tell me that you understand, I don't think you do understand. So I just want to hear you say that you don't understand.
Right. It's like, let's cut to it. You don't understand. I feel like we're more on the same team when you just say that versus going into it, which it probably could lead you to feel more overwhelmed than anything.
Yeah, and I don't know if there's any women out there who are with me on this, but a significant amount of the time that I am talking about my feelings or my frustrations or what I'm upset about, I'm actually just externally processing. I actually just want to talk about it.
Yeah.
I don't want to fix it right now. I'm aware that there's many potential solutions. The fact that you're giving me potential solutions makes me want to kick you in the face. Stop giving me solutions. Right now I want to wallow.
And maybe even like talk in a circle, like just for the sake of it, like ruminate. And if that's frustrating for the other person to sit in, maybe there's a time limit. Like that can feel like I need 10 minutes to talk as crazy circles as I need to, and I need you to support me in that, and we're done. At 10-minute mark. It reminds me when you were talking of my brother and I lived together for a year as adults, and it was an interesting experience, and we're super tight. And very shortly into the arrangement, we said, well, we don't want to like risk our awesome brother and sisterhood and friendship over this year. We need to have a word that would stop any issues. So we like came up with our safe word for living together. And it was like, if either of us needed time apart or conversations got heated or we didn't want to talk anymore, and we had the word solstice, which is such a cool word because it felt like there's so much like peaceful energy in that. And it was used, very few amount of times. But that was a relationship outside of like a romantic partnership where it was able to come up with some boundary. And it was just, as soon as that was said, it was respect, it was over, it was done. And having some of those built-in boundaries, even if it is through some learning, so it could be after the fact, can be so helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I realized when I said that, mine was proactively communicating my needs and desires. It wasn't, it was communicating those after years of challenging communication patterns where this exact same thing would happen. Like I would be upset about something, I'd be spiraling out, he'd be trying to fix it, he'd be getting frustrated because I'm rejecting all of his solutions, and we just kind of go round and round until he'd be like, I'm trying to help you. And then he's angry, and then I'm like, why are you yelling at me? I'm crying. And it's like, it finally realized like, and he would always come back to the same thing, and he would say, we are on the same team. I'm on your team. And you know, if you know me at all, like I'm on my own damn team. Like, it's been a lifelong process of me learning how to be a team player. That's something that doesn't come easily or naturally to me. So I think this is all kind of speaking to two or three main things. One is it always starts with self-awareness, right? We have to be willing to examine our own role in the conversation, in the communication, and not only be looking at what the other person is doing. That's one. And I think that's important because I do think that we often, especially when we're in maybe less mature levels of awareness about conscious communication, there's like we have blinders on to our own role in the dynamic, and we're just only seeing like, well, this person isn't listening, or this person, you know, keeps throwing blame, or this person whatever, which is like ironic, right?
No,
So
and this is such,
that self-awareness is a foundational aspect of creating conscious communication.
not only agree, but I want to like pause the mic for a second and just really like, I feel like if anytime there's conflict, you have the opportunity for such a gift to really see, like, even if it's one little thing, what could I have done differently, even if it was quote unquote the other person's total fault, right? But there's always some opportunity, and I say always, like I 100% say always, something that you could learn or do a little bit better. And maybe it was just being a little bit better of a listener, or not answering so quickly, or letting that person vent. I mean, there's always something that you could learn from. And when you make it all about the other person without looking at what you could have shifted even slightly, like moved the dial just a bit, you're missing a growth and a learning opportunity. Is that something that I do every single time, every single interaction? Of course not, like human being over here. But I do believe that it's always there for me to learn if I'm willing to look.
So do you think, Linda, that we could apply your 10% rule to our communications as well, in that as we're examining ourselves, we could just say, hey, can I give 10% more grace? Or can I give 10% more space for breath? Or can I give 10% more loving kindness in this situation?
Yes, there's definitely 10% more. And breath, like when we were first talking, that felt like such a powerful part of this, is like, that to me is presence. So being fully in the moment, breathing, being attuned, being able to show up in this exact moment without all the other storylines of what could be, what they're thinking, what the past stories have been, but to truly the present and using breath to get there. That's where I think real magic has the opportunity. And I actually have a theory about it. I use it more for marriages and like committed partnerships. But I think it applies to anything, because we're ever evolving, every single person, right? Every single day, our body, our physical systems, everything is growing, moving, becoming more and more new each day.
Mm-hmm.
So that then every single interaction with someone is a new interaction. And we tend to have the lens of what's already taken place and bring that to that present, and not giving the person the opportunity to show up with the newness of that moment. And I think we can really miss out on the other person's growth because we're often projecting what we've already experienced back onto them.
Girl, you are crushing it with that. So good and so deep. That's really, truly profound. Every interaction is a new interaction. I agree with that. You were still going, and I just
I wasn't.
I got so excited.
It is exciting. I mean, I think about some of my most challenging relationships, whether family or friendships, and it makes me so excited thinking of just whatever's next, because like that, and that's where the grace or the willingness to see through that freshness and see through that newness is where the miracle can happen. Mm-hmm. And if we could all think of that.
I'd love to take a thoughtful pause on that and just speak right now to anyone who is involved in a relationship that is toxic or abusive. When your safety is being violated, disregarded, or your basic needs are not being met in a particular relationship, that is outside the scope of this conversation. Don't stay in it if it's harming you. Okay. So where we say every interaction is a new interaction, don't use that as a permission slip to stay in communication with someone who really the line of communication with that person needs to be cut off. So sidebar, if you're in it really bad with someone, this isn't, this may improve it if there's a relationship that's able to be salvaged. I just think the examination of whether that's what's good for you should be considered before you try to apply these principles to fixing things. If it's really, really broke, don't fix it, just leave.
And if you are able to, start incurring some strong boundaries, or leave, but I think boundaries have a huge place in this, depending on the relationship.
Yeah. I'm thinking of my own past and talking about specifically like serious emotional and mental and physical abuse.
Time
and
to
in that
go.
situation, get out, girl or boy or gender neutral person, whatever you are, get out. All right. So that's a good segue to dive in a little bit more to proactive communication of needs and boundaries. So what does that mean? And we talked about self-awareness. Once you start to notice your own thoughts and emotions, how do you communicate to somebody else how you want to be treated or spoken to?
I think one big thing is to acknowledge, like, when you're in the heat of tension or frustration or the trigger, that's probably not the best time to have that communication. That's a great time to observe, to really take an inventory of what's going on for you, and letting a cooling off point, letting the communication be at a later time. It could even be through a different medium, if that's through a text or an email. I think there's mixed thoughts and feelings about using some of those modalities, but if that works for you, that can work.
A handwritten letter.
There's been letters that this actually just happened to me, where I was writing a letter about something that had been on my mind. I had no intention of sending, and it was a friendship that had transitioned to not being so tight. And after I wrote it, I thought, this is perfect to send. And I sent it, and there was a real, beautiful mending that had taken place. And so writing can also work.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is
cool off.
Cool off. Yeah. Do it in a neutral space and time. And I think that's really important, because I think that both parties, when you are in the heat of the moment, like you said before, you're drawing on all of your past experiences, and we're often engaged, even if we keep it inside, in the you always and you never kind of mentality, which is not really the greatest space. It's a place of blame, and it's a place of feeling personally attacked, which is not a great place to communicate your needs and boundaries. It is an okay place to set a boundary and say, I'm going to exit this conversation right now and come back to it when I've cooled off. So what we do mean, though, by proactive communication of needs and boundaries is get clear on what feels good to you, what feels empowering to you. And I would encourage you to even be very specific. Like I said, with that example of, I will give my husband the actual script that I want him to say. And it doesn't have to be husband. This could be family member, friend, whatever, but letting him know, when I'm doing this, what would feel best for me is to hear you say this. And then he can choose whether or not to do that. But it's really helpful to tell people exactly how you want to be treated.
And I've noticed when you do this, I feel, but it's more about the I feel versus what you're doing, and being able to take your ownership then for whatever that boundary is.
Yes. And so I think the responsibility and ownership of your own, thoughts, will, and emotions is really important, and something that is a constant throughout this, whole discussion of conscious communication, is just the recognition of personal responsibility. You are part of that conversation. So how you are showing up is half the battle, I guess, or whatever you want to call it. So giving grace in communication, proactive communication of needs and boundaries. Can you give us an example of like a proactive communication of a boundary? Like what would that look like for someone who maybe doesn't really know what setting boundaries even means, because that's not something that they've done?
Yeah, I mean, this could be a pretty simple example, but if someone say has an anger, like anger is a thing that can come up in communication, or maybe extreme frustration before it's hitting like a threshold of where say abuse would come to a point, but just anger is like their routine. And that for the other person is like a hard no. It could look something like, I have trouble communicating to you when you reach to a certain point of anger. I understand how you could get to that feeling. And at a certain point, that's a hard no. Can you honor that boundary? And so it would just be taking whatever it is for you that is the trigger and communicating that into a way from the standpoint of where it is that upsets you to the person that's doing that.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes that comes even from within ourselves. Like I remember, in the communications with myself and my husband, when I just wanted to keep going. I just wanted to keep fighting. And he's like, I'm so done fighting with you. Like, I need to leave. And then, my response to that is like, you're abandoning me. Like you don't care. You don't care about this relationship. You don't care about fixing it. When really, I was just like, I don't even know what kind of, like a honey badger. I was like honey badgering him. Like, and so we had to come up with, like you said, a safe word. Yours was with your brother and mine was with my husband, but we just went with the simple, like yellow and red. Yellow is, I'm starting to get angry. I need to exit the room. I need to exit the conversation. I think we should just consensually agree to do that now. And then red is full hard stop. The conversation is over. If either person says red, one person needs to leave the scene, and literally with 0 words exchanged after the word red, which can be a really difficult thing to do. Like, especially if you're a honey badger like me, like
well, no, the honey badger, I mean, there's something that you were getting at the moment that you're honey badgering. And I think this is
control and power.
Important to look at, because that's sometimes like you could feel control and power. Maybe there are either other
attention,
something like a little more exciting than whatever was going on for you in the prior moment, and identifying what you're getting through that communication and finding other ways to meet that other than honey badgering your husband. Maybe it's going on a different path's walk that day, or watching something different on TV, or whatever.
Or going to go do something really physically challenging, like literally go run until like my heart's pounding out of my chest, or like go scream at the top of my lungs.
There's something that's not being met that's like a cheap and easy way, could be a cheap and easy way to meet that. And I think that's a big part of this, like taking responsibility, is looking at some of these like less than desirable communication points. When you really look at your role, there is something that's being met through it. It just depends on if you're able to see it, and then giving yourself some great substitutions, because like you could just be getting off on honey badgering and like at the expense of the relationship, and it kind of being okay because it's meeting a need for you, and you sort of give yourself permission to meet that need, so you keep doing it. And that's an example that I think probably a lot of people can relate to in their own ways.
Absolutely. And I think there's, there's not always, but often within any individual kind of relationship dynamic, there might be one party who has the tendency more to be the aggressor, and there might be one party who has the tendency more to be the pacifist. And we wear these hats and we play these roles. And there also needs to be a time which, we exit the stage and we take those hats and roles off and are able to talk to each other like about what the other one needs. Because in me being that honey badger and being controlling and defensive and the aggressor, my husband is a natural pacifist. He's a very, and I don't mean that to denote weakness at all. Like, he's a strong ass pacifist, which is great. He doesn't like to fight. He likes to diffuse conflict. It's just his way of being. But that almost gave me permission, or, you know, like I would let myself go further, because it took a lot to push him to the point where he would really like make it stop. So, you know, consider that and look at the relationship and figure out, is there one who's naturally the aggressor and one who's naturally more of the pacifist? And then whichever role it is that you identify with, you know, step back and say, like, can I do this differently? Like, it's really that simple. Can I do this differently? And so one of the things that we've done to improve this is simply me speaking out loud that I'm in the desire to engage right now. And, you know, we've developed our own kind of codes and stuff around this, but also sometimes it's just me saying, like, I feel crazy right now. I want to fight with you. And he's like, okay, well, what do you think we should do about it? You know? And so, you know, depending on the health of your relationship, whatever type of relationship it is, you're in the relationship with this person, whether it's a love relationship, a family relationship, a work relationship, because there is a certain element of mutual respect or necessity or love. It's one of the three. So keeping that in mind, is there a way in which you can proactively look at what are my patterns, and when I see them start to emerge, what is one thing that I could do differently to just change the course? And it takes practice. It's like, I think we touched on this last week. It's a process of improving your recovery time. So it's not like you're going to figure this out. The light bulb's going to go off today as you're listening to this podcast, and then all of your relationships and communication are going to just be like 100% better. No, like, you're still going to fuck it up. You're still going to like do the stuff that you do that leads into that negative spiral. But it's like, how quickly can you move from unconsciously participating to consciously stepping back and just gaining awareness that you're doing it so that you can divert.
Your own your whoa moment. Whoa, I don't need to go down that.
Yeah, and then your pivot point, as you like to say.
This brings to mind one thing that when you also consider how sometimes there can be an expectation of how a certain person should operate and how they actually are, and how you would want them to be in your life and how they actually are, and the kind of push-pull that can come up through that. And I've noticed that in certain relationships, and this can often come up in different family dynamics, of wanting someone to show up in a certain way and them not, that's just not who they are. Mm-hmm. And it's like the moment that you can understand, love, accept the person where they are, who they are, versus what your idea of who they should be. Mm-hmm. That's a game changer. I think that comes up a lot with parents, because we have cultural conditioning and just an innate desire to be supported, loved, and held by our parents in a way that as we grow older, and we start to see them as people, sometimes even when we're younger, you know, it can feel like they're letting us down because they're not fitting this image of like what the ideal, again with the air quotes, the ideal mother or ideal father would look like. And I completely agree with you, Linda. Like, there comes a point where if we can just remember that this is another human, and that their humanity, their personhood is not exclusive to who they are to me. Right? My mom is not just my mom. She's a mom. She's a wife. She's a sister. She's a professor. She's, you know, she has all of these different hats, and she's a person. Like, forget all the labels and the titles. She's her own person. And how selfish like, as you just said that, I'm like, God, like that, how selfish it can be of like, fuck, like you're not the version of mom that I thought you should be. And it's like, I'm doing 15 other things in my life in any given moment, and I'm doing my best in each of them. Like, it just, the grace opportunity.
Yeah.
I
And
love you,
if
mom.
we know
Love you,
how
mom.
yeah, love you, mom. I know we know how fallible we are. Like we each can look at ourselves and go like, oh yeah, I'm not perfect and I have flaws and like I don't always get everything right. So why would we expect other people to be perfect and to always get everything right? Like we need to recognize that like people are doing the best that they can with the tools that they have. Usually. Sometimes they're not. And we'll talk about when people are in their shadow communication, or, you know, in other words, they're being an asshole. Sometimes it's truly that they're doing the best with the tools that they have, and other times they have tools to do better and they're just being a dick. So, and maybe you recognize that about yourself too, that you have tools to do better and you actually are aware of ways to practice better conscious communication. And yet sometimes you're just a dick. I don't know. Me? Yeah. Speaking to myself. Well, so let's talk, Linda, about a couple other tools or resources that people might be able to use as they're trying to implement more conscious communication in their lives. Shall we?
Let's do it.
All right. So,
Listening.
yeah. Listening is super duper important. And it's easier for some people than others. If you are a naturally extroverted external processor with a loud personality type, me, then getting to mastery of active listening may be a lifelong process. But it really helps to first know what active listening is. And I'd love to share with you an acronym that that my husband actually taught me. It hails from his days in law enforcement when they actually provided them with training on active listening so that they could better diffuse conflict situations. So it seems
Sounds
very
like a
relevant.
helpful tool.
Yes, and the acronym for this is LEAPS. 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 And LEAPS is listen, empathize, ask questions, paraphrase, summarize. So we're listening to what the person has to say. Empathizing is letting them know that you understand how they feel, or you don't understand, but you're willing to stay the course with them. Ask questions. So get clarity. If there's something that you don't understand, see if you can move deeper into understanding it. So maybe asking clarifying questions, maybe asking questions that will help you to better understand their perspective or the foundation of what they're actually saying. Paraphrase, once they've answered those questions, is repeat it back to them. Put it back to them in your own words. This affirms that you are actually listening. It validates that they are there present with you in the moment. And it also lets you know that you understand where they're coming from. And then summarize, similar to paraphrase, but after you've gone through kind of the back and forth of the listening, empathizing, ask questions, paraphrasing, then you'll come to a point where we'll say, so what I understand that you're saying is this is the problem. This is how you feel about it. This is what you desire the solution would be. And this would be the action that we would take to get to that solution. Am I correct in my summary of this, event?
Yeehaw!
Yeah. So that's LEAPS. That's active listening. And I have found this to be a really, really, really powerful tool, especially in business, actually. Active listening will benefit you in every relationship in your life. It'll definitely benefit your love relationships and your family relationships. But business, I think, is an area where we often forget that the client, the customer, the person that you're serving is a person. They're not a number. They're not a paycheck. They're not a dollar sign. They're a person. So the better you can understand them as a person through practicing active listening, the better you'll be able to meet their needs. And meeting somebody's needs is the root of marketing, sales, customer service, basically all of the pillars of business, right?
Well, and
Business.
like the see, hear, love, understand, that it's not only in your romantic partnership, it's in any relationship, and carrying that into business. I mean, I would argue that you could take business to levels you've never seen before if you're into implementing that communication.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, girl.
Where it's at, man. So that's leaps, and I think you should try it. Let us know how that goes for you. Linda, what do you think about the love languages? Can you share with us a little about what are love languages and how might those help our conscious communication?
I love the five languages. So it's words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, physical touch. And if you do the love language newsletter, you actually get recommendations for each of those love languages that you could try. And in the newsletter, it's actually not just for your romantic partnership, it's for any type of relationship. And these five love languages, if you're looking for ways to connect, I think knowing that each person has a different way that they want to best receive love and looking at how you can meet those needs, it can be a great gauge on doing that.
Do you know what your love languages are? Your primary ones?
I have five. They're words. I'm just kidding.
I was like,
yes, I like quality time and physical touch.
those are mine too. No wonder we're lovers.
And then the third would be
we're not actually lovers. Mom, don't. I mean, my mom.
The third would be receiving gifts.
Okay, yeah. I think you're a gift giver for sure.
Yeah, and quality time is definitely a big one.
Mine are also quality time and physical touch. And my husband's are also quality time and physical touch, which is nice. We kind of got a little boost there and making it a bit easier for us to communicate. So yeah, basically these are your ways of giving and receiving love. So if you don't know, I think there's a free test you can take on their website.
Yeah. And I think too, it's interesting because how you give is not necessarily how you like to receive.
Totes.
Right. And so it's interesting because my boyfriend's is also quality time and physical touch, but I think we both like giving different ones. Mm-hmm. And those aren't what the other person wants to receive.
Yeah, it's funny because my husband definitely likes to give acts of service.
So does he.
He's so good about like, let me clean the house, let me fix this, let me go do this for you. And I think I really like to give words of affirmation. I'm a natural encourager. That's just who I am as a person. And I also love to give gifts. So both of us want to receive time spent together, quality time, and physical touch, but we're both giving each other different love languages.
Like it could just be so simple.
So this is something that I think there's a lot of opportunity for insight in these. Obviously, it's fun. It's just fun to kind of check these out. But I do think it's helped me a lot over the years to understand what feels really good and what feels good to give and what feels good to receive. So that will equip you with more tools in being able to proactively communicate your needs and desires to
and just anybody. To understand yourself more. I think it's easy to have narrow views on like even what these five different things are, and they could be so expanded, and you can really know yourself and others through that process.
Yeah, and while we're on that subject, I think it would just benefit people to say really quick that all the kind of self-exploration through personality tests can be really fun and helpful. It's not that you need to take it for gospel, but if you want to take some time out and go do Myers-Briggs, which is a personality test, or your Enneagram, which is another personality test, there's quite a few out there. Knowing whether you're extroverted, introverted, intuitive, feeling, judging, perceiving, kind of all these qualities about ourselves, it can be really helpful to just giving yourself more grace and also becoming aware of how you communicate and how you move through the world.
I was sending everybody, like my family and my boyfriend, these links to personality tests so I could understand them better.
Yeah, I put them on all my coaching intake forms because I realized
really
it's important for me to know if somebody's an introvert or an extrovert. And You know, are they a feeler or a thinker? Like, those are two totally different things, because I'm a feeler girl. You and I like to talk about feelings.
I want to talk to you about how I feel.
And so that's just different, you know? And you'll know, man, if you're, you know, an extroverted, intuitive, feeling perceiver, and you come into the room with an introverted, thinking, judging, whatever the other one is, like, you're going to have different communication styles. You're going to have different, even like physical space boundaries and things like that. And I think that's where sometimes perceived judgment comes in. Like,
you just said the J word.
Right. Like, somebody's quiet, you know, here I am, Miss Loudmouth Sassy Pants doesn't ever stop yapping. And sometimes if I get in a room with someone who's just really quiet, I don't do it anymore. But I used to think like they don't like me because they're not talking 1,000 words a minute. It doesn't mean they don't like me. It just means they're not a talker.
When you see with judgment, you are blind.
Oh, so good. So love languages are great. Personality tests are great. Another thing, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, is giving grace and permission for shadow communication. What the hell does that mean? What is shadow communication?
It's when you go to your less than resourceful space and communicate.
Yeah, it's when you travel to the dark side.
This, for me, has a direct correlation with hormonal cycles.
Mm-hmm. It does probably for especially many women, for everybody. I mean, men have hormones too, but for women, since we are naturally cyclical creatures and we move through, you know, different seasons in our body as we move through our menstrual cycle, like there's a very real biochemical, thing happening that's affecting everything in you, but especially how you communicate, right?
One of my guy friends, he's like, so what, do you want me to just be like nice the week before my girlfriend's period? And I'm like, I mean, that's a great idea. I think you'll have greater success. I'm exaggerating a little, but it was like that. I'm like, it could be really helpful to understand what that natural cycle is like, and when a woman is more sensitive, if that's the way she experiences that time.
Yeah, and I think getting our partners, especially, you know, the male partners, to understand the cycle is like, that's like graduate school. Okay, let's just go to just like college, which is understanding your own cycle, because there's so many women who, and I was one of them until quite recently. I mean, it was after I had my son, so 31 or 32 is the first time that I really started to become very conscious of my cycle, because my hormones had changed during pregnancy, and my luteal phase, which is that week before the period, I mean, pretty consistently 7 days before my period, I felt like I was losing my fucking mind. I was angry and sensitive and like extreme where it felt just like I can't do life right now, like not suicidal, but like severe anxiety, severe depression, just the sense that everything is wrong in the world. And it was like, that had to happen for quite a few months before I went like, I feel like there's a pattern here. And for some reason, I'd always thought growing up that PMS was like, and I don't know where I learned this, like probably 17 magazine. Like I thought PMS was just like the day before your period, or like maybe 2 days. And it was mainly just like the bloating and kind of,
yeah, there was
whatever
something going around in some of those teen mags that were a little confusing about PMS.
Right? Because when you learn the actual like cycle, there is an entire phase, the luteal phase of your cycle, where your body is realized like, okay, this egg is not fertilized, we're going to shed it. And it's this process of like starting to prepare to release the uterine lining, right? You never knew how much you were going to learn on Rise to Thrive podcast. So anyway, what we're saying is there are times where you might find yourself sliding more into your shadow communication, which for lack of better words is you're being a jerk, right? You're being a jerk.
Because I'm a jerk. I'm a jerk. I'm a jerk.
And I know that my most common slide into my shadow communication is defensiveness. Defensiveness is my doorway to my shadow. And I go from defensiveness to blame and judgment and anger. And, oh God, what is the word for when you're being like really psycho needy? Like this, like, you know what I mean? Maybe that's just
like
the word.
needy.
Like really needy, but like, yeah, like, irrationally hysterical about like how much I need this other person. People are gonna be like, this lady, man. So anyway, why would we tell you to permit shadow communication then? Why would we suggest that if you're engaging with someone who's in their shadow communication, that you just let them do it, right?
Light bulb.
Is there a light bulb there? So what I'm suggesting is that when we interrupt someone's shadow communication, so when they're being a dick and you're like, yo, you're being a dick, you're interrupting their opportunity for self-awareness. Now, please do keep in mind your own healthy boundaries and that you are not a doormat and you're not a whipping post and you don't need to remain in the encounter or in the conversation beyond your boundaries. But, you know, when the person that you're talking to is being, you know, they're in their shadow communication, they said something that's not that nice, or they're doing something that's not that cool, try staying quiet. Try just not saying anything.
Breathing.
Breathing. And you may find that more often than you would expect, the person will recognize their shadow communication after a minute or two, and they will apologize, or they will at least acknowledge their shadow communication and say, hey, you know, I'm sorry for saying that to you. I was just feeling X, Y, or Z. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings, right? And then they've had the opportunity for self-awareness to take, you know, an action towards redemption, or, you know, just turning back, or repentance, turning back towards you. And they've started a new conversation, which is productive, which is, I desire reconciliation. I desire to pivot, to steer this conversation in a new direction. So this may work sometimes, and sometimes it may not work. If you are engaging with a honey badger and you try to permit their shadow communication, the honey badger can go for a long, long time before they realize that they're in their shadow.
That they are not being very effective in their communication.
Yeah. And, you know, that I would say, like, it usually will happen. Like, if and when, you know, my husband has let me just honey badger myself into exhaustion, then once I'm exhausted, I'll usually realize there's another way that I could ask for my needs to be met, and it looks like this, and I owe him an apology, you know. And I'll usually get there on my own, but it might take me sulking and crying in my room for a while before I get there. There's more vulnerability than I expected in this episode about conscious communication.
Brings up a lot.
Yeah. So what do you think about that? I mean, have you found it valuable to let somebody else, you know, stay in their shadow, or have you found that
it's a practice, like being able to like breathe and say like, oh, they're in their shadow, like they're exploring whatever that is for them without interrupting. Like, I think I have opportunity to get better at that, because I might feel offended in that moment, or
we
like,
take it personally.
Yeah, needing to set the boundary right then and there. And I could see how giving an extra 2 to 3 minutes of that experience for that person, and then, you know, the next thing would definitely, I would say more times than not, be an apology. But just even the acknowledgement that people have shadow communication, I think is so powerful, because within yourself and others, if it seems like it's less than resourceful, and it probably in that exact moment is the best that they could do, even though they have skills and tools way beyond, but in that exact moment it is. We've talked before about the hungry, angry, lonely, and tired. I mean, there's so many factors, from past triggers to current emotional, physiological state, that could be going on.
And just to the necessity of emotions, like anger serves a purpose, sadness serves a purpose, like fear serves a purpose, anxiety, all of these emotions that tend to we would label them shadow emotions because they are not the happy, fun, free, and light feelings. They're the feelings from the dark side. You need those. Those are part of being human. They're adapted traits that exist for a reason, right? If we don't have anger, then we won't have change. If we don't have fear, then we'll get eaten by a lion. Like,
and being in those shadow emotions, I mean, I've been able to, when I've been given the grace to fully explore that for myself and be able to see whatever insights come, it becomes so powerful and real change and insights that can be integrated for the long term. So I can see how powerful that experience can be.
Yeah, in other words, it's really different for you to realize you're a dick than for somebody else to tell you you're a dick.
Because if they tell me, I don't believe them.
Amen. Can't get a witness. I don't believe him either. All right. So I think that's a good segue to fighting fair, because these are kind of in the same wheelhouse. Permitting shadow communication, I would say, is part of fighting fair. It's the recognition that this person's having a different experience than I am. Just as I would ask them to honor, my feelings and allow me to emote and to get through that stuff, I'm going to do the same thing for them. Do you have other tools in your fighting fair toolkit, Linda, that you'd like to share with us?
One that can be a problem is I like to resolve before the next day. And I've experienced where like that person wants to
You're
resolve.
up at 2:30 in the morning crying in your bed and your partner's just like, go to sleep. And you're like, I can't go to sleep. Too upset. Got to work tomorrow. And you're in the endless spiral of guilt and shame. And is that just me?
Someone did tell me that I'm a really pretty crier, though.
Oh, I'm sure you are. I mean, you're just pretty in general. But
yeah,
you have like this big crocodile tear. Your eyes get really blue. I can see that.
I don't know. Something must happen.
Aren't your eyes brown?
Yes.
Yeah.
But they turn blue when I cry.
They got really blue.
Yeah, so that's something where understanding that I may want to resolve at the end of the day, and the other person might want to resolve when they feel like they're in a state or space to resolve, and those two might not equal the same thing. Mm-hmm. So the underststanding that I'm okay, I'm whole, I'm 100% okay if this isn't going to be resolved today and at the end at midnight when the clock strikes midnight, mm-hmm. and that I can still sleep and that I can still take care of myself. And I think that what I've noticed is that's just maybe even past conditioning. And I feel like that's a storyline that we've been told, even, is like, don't go to sleep angry. It's like, it's okay. Everyone's going to be okay if you go to sleep angry. And there may be a more appropriate time to resolve. So as part of fighting fair, what I've found is that having like that kind of conversation is when it works for both parties, not just like when I want to have it.
Mm-hmm. I think that's really, really good.
And a safe time and space. And this may be whether it be an intimate partner or any other relationship. It's like where that feels good, and often that's a neutral space. It's not where it can become like very triggered. I had a roommate once that lost it on me, and our reconciliation, like didn't feel comfortable being in our living space, and that literally equaled like the hallway, and we were able to resolve. And so it's what works, I think, for both people, and you're not being afraid to say whatever that is for you.
Right. So yeah, you can't bully people into making up with you. So stop trying to do that. Okay. That's for all of us.
So are we good? Are we good? So are we good? Are we good? Are we good?
All it's going to do is eventually get that person to acquiesce in a way that's not authentic. Acquiesce means give in. They're going to give in and they're not going to mean it. And then it's like, that's counterproductive, because they will then carry resentment and lack of trust in you for allowing them to be who and what they are in that moment. So don't do that. Another thing to avoid is always and never. And I think most of us, if we examine past fights, have a tendency to bring these words in. And you touched on this earlier, like we bring in all of the past experiences that we've had, and we usually combine those together with one of these words. You always do this, you never do this. most of the time that's one, not accurate. Always is a pretty big concept, and so is never. So probably, maybe frequently they do X, Y, or Z, or often they do X, Y, or Z, or rarely they do X, Y, or Z.
Almost every time.
Yeah. I would say that those statements are probably also could be tweaked and modified a little bit to make them more effective. So rather than saying, you always do this, you always do that, first of all, try I statements instead of you statements. So flip the lens, and instead of looking at the faults of the other person, the responsibilities, obligations, failures of the other person, take your little gaze to yourself and see, what are you bringing to this conflict? So reframing and I feel, I think, my experience is, that's a great start. And then also try to be accurate with your language. And this is so hard when we are emotional. And that's where breath is going to be your strongest tool. Because if you slow down and breathe instead of talking for just a minute, and you ask yourself, like, hey, I'm about to say, like, you never listen to me. You never do what I ask you to do. All I asked you to do was go shopping with me because I want to get jeans, and you'll never go with me. It's like, whoa, slow down, take a breath. Is that accurate? Or did he go shopping with you 2 or 3 times and then you realized that you were not good shopping buddies because he didn't want to go? Okay,
I'm having a visual of, how these cameras now are everywhere. You can get like security cameras, but I feel like everything will be cameraed, and it'll be like, okay, Google, like play when we went shopping together, and then it would rewind and it'd be like, see, I showed you, it was on, the exact like timestamp of when you.
Oh my gosh, that's a dystopian future I don't want to participate in. But all the more reason to not be using the always and never statements, because
we got
there will be cameras everywhere, and we'll be able to prove to you that you're wrong and I'm right. Wait a minute, Linda.
I always take out the trash, see?
All right, so fighting fair, avoid always and never. Try to frame things in the first person. So I feel, I think, my experience is, ask for what you want. Would you be willing to, or I would like, or could we try this?
And when you ask, don't beat around the bush. Like, this has been some of my communication fumbles where I'm like trying to get the buy-in, or like make them say, or it be their idea. And it's like, no, I want to go here. Would you like to join? Or whatever way that works for you, but being really clear in the communication so there doesn't become this guessing game of like this, or maybe.
And as much as possible to like do that in love, because sometimes we have to be honest and we have to tell people like tough truths, or like, I'm thinking of a communication that I had where I had to set a firm boundary, and like it wasn't going to be an easy conversation no matter which way we said it, because it was bringing up somebody else's deep shadow stuff, addiction stuff that is not going to be resolved through this conversation, but I need to put a boundary around it, right? And so I just totally lost where I was going. I think I like got sucked into the trauma of that memory.
But it's I think you said communication with love, and a word that I really like, because aggressive feels like there's not much love around, but assertive and assertive with love. Assertive to me feels like really clear, and it's just allowing like the flow of clear communication in a loving way, but in a really like clear and firm way.
That's where I was going. Yeah. The remembrance that telling the truth is loving, because in truth, all freedom abides. Like when we're not telling the truth, or we're not living in the truth, or we have, lies in our lives, like you can't have a foundation for a shared real experience when like there's 2 different things happening because you're lying. So
yeah, and this tell the truth, this is like a good coach friend of mine. She says, tell the truth and tell it fast. And I think so much of communication issues can come when there feels like the truth hasn't been told to the fullest on either side.
Totally. And we drag our feet in doing that because we are afraid of how it's going to go down, or what's going to happen. Am I going to lose this relationship? just, there's a lot of fear around things, how things are going to be received. But I do think that that's great advice. Tell the truth and tell it fast. And as much as possible, tell it in love, and recognize that sometimes love doesn't mean nice. It doesn't mean, you can be kind and you can be truthful and you can be clear, and that may still hurt somebody's feelings. Because their feelings are not your responsibility.
Right. You're responsible for your feelings and your communication of those.
Right. And they're responsible for theirs.
Right.
Okay, yeah. Good. So we established that. So, and that is the perfect segue to what I think is our final suggestion here, which is the platinum rule. So can you share with us, what is the platinum rule?
Speak to others how they want to be spoken to, treated, loved, but how they want to.
Yeah, so many of us, right. So not to be confused with the golden rule, which says treat others as you would like to be treated, which is, that example of like, hey, my love languages are time spent together and physical touch.
So I'll give him that.
Yeah. So it's just remembering that how we want to give and receive love and communication is different from somebody else. So how do we put the platinum rule into practice?
I know one way.
Please share.
Understand where they're coming from. Understand where they've came from. And when you can really get into how someone sees the world and experiences it and how their programming came into play, a lot of the platinum rule can make sense. So how they want to be treated, what can be triggering to them, and having like sensitivity and grace to that.
Yes. And I think a way to uncover that information would be to ask them. So if you are trying to figure out how somebody else, whoever it is, friend, parent, lover, teacher, whatever, how they want to be communicated to, ask them. You don't know everything about their life history. You can't observe necessarily all of it, but say, what would feel really good to you when I want to talk about sex? How would you like to talk about that? When I want to talk about money, what would be the best environment and time to discuss that? I want to talk about, if you want to talk about a raise, like probably the best time to do that I don't know, maybe the best time would be the holiday party when you and your boss are both drunk. Probably get the raise.
And also, like, should it be scheduled? Is it better unscheduled? I mean, there's so many little things that people have sensitivities and preference to. And if you can understand that, yes, I want it scheduled, obviously, all the time.
Yeah. And I think that's really good, because some people would be like, no, never schedule it. Like, I just want to do it when it feels right. And then
let's be normal.
They're going to be like, floating, like, when it feels right, like I need it on the calendar so I can prepare for it to feel right. Like, what are you talking about? So yeah, everybody's different, man. Message of conscious communication. Like, we are all different people and we need different things and we want different things. So we've got to learn to treat other people as they would like to be treated. And I'd love to know, do you have any suggestions for reading material, Linda, that might take us deeper on the topic of conscious communication?
Funny you should ask, because I do. Today's conscious communication book of the week is The 5 Love Languages: The Secret to Love That Lasts. This is used for not only your romantic relationships, but any. And as I mentioned, the newsletter gives some great ideas and insights into how you can communicate in any type of relationship. I think this is one that's like an annual revisit. If you have never read it, treat yourself. And it's a short read, 77 pages.
Yeah, and if you dig it, I think they have a workbook too. So if like you are, trying to make this stuff more actionable, maybe check that out. It's a totally unfounded plug because I haven't done the workbook, so I have no idea if it's any good. You do it and let me know.
Hashtag let us know.
All right. We're just having a blast with you guys. We love you so much. You guys are giving us such great feedback, and we're just so thankful to be able to be in community with you during this time. And if you are digging the podcast, we would love it if you would please subscribe, share it with your friends, leave us a review, let us know how it's enabling you to rise to your highest self and to get out there and thrive every day.
And if you have any topics that you would like to explore, please shoot those in the comments also.
Yeah, let us
Yeah,
know what you want
buddy.
to do.
Yeah,
And we'll do
buddy.
it. All right, guys, that's it for today. Hey, make sure if you haven't checked it out yet, we dropped a bonus episode. It's a meditation. Linda, what's it for? Meditating?
It's a guided meditation that will be very centering and a powerful visualization.
Yeah, so for anybody who's into meditating, check it out. If you are
7 minutes and 17 seconds.
There you go. New to meditation. It's only 7 minutes and 17 seconds of your life that will change your life. So go check that out right now. And then connect with us on the Instagram, the Facebook, the interwebs, ethers, email, digital. All right, guys, it's getting wild here. So we got to go. Drop more gems weekly so you can thrive daily. Take it easy, party people. We'll catch you on the flip side.